Teacher mocks black girl by making her play piano. Regrets it the moment. She starts. The moment. Kennedy James's fingers touched the keys, the entire room forgot how to breathe. What began as a cruel, smug attempt to humiliate her turned into something no one saw coming. Not her classmates. Not the teacher who singled her out. Not even Kennedy herself. The soft, haunting notes that poured from the old upright piano swept through the room like a gust of cold wind, cutting through the laughter, the whispers, the shallow smirks, and replacing them with stunned silence. Mr. Malcolm Reeves stood at the front of the room, arms folded tightly across his chest, his jaw tense. He had called her out moments earlier, his voice laced with sarcastic charm, expecting nothing more than a stammer, maybe a few clumsy notes if she even dared to try. But now his eyes narrowed. His smirk had vanished. His mouth parted slightly, but he said nothing. And Kennedy? She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She just played. Earlier that morning, Kennedy stepped off the number 15 city bus in front of Maple Creek Conservatory, the most prestigious arts high school in Portland. Her sneakers were worn at the edges, and her coat wasn't designer, just functional. Around her, clusters of students in tailored uniforms and high-end scarves sipped lattes and compared their audition tapes. No one greeted her. No one ever did. Kennedy had gotten in on scholarship, the only black girl in her grade, and as far as most of her peers were concerned, she didn't belong. She was quiet, kept to herself, and never responded to the stares or whispers. Her mother, April James, worked overnight as a CNA and slept during the day. They lived in a small apartment over a laundromat, 2 bus rides away from school. There was no Steinway Grand at home, no private tutor. Just a second-hand keyboard her mom got off Craigslist, and the church piano she practiced on when the sanctuary was empty. Inside the school's ornate main building, the walls were lined with portraits of past prodigies, all of them smiling with polished confidence. Kennedy passed under those faces every day and never looked up. That morning in class, the air had already been thick with judgment. Savannah Roth, the daughter of a prominent city councilman and a former Juilliard alum, held court in the front row with her group of friends, her platinum curls bouncing as she laughed. "So, who's ready to see some real talent?" Savannah had joked, pulling a compact mirror from her Prada bag. Mr. Reeves, a tall, aging man with a fondness for velvet blazers and biting sarcasm, had a reputation for favoring students with impressive resumes and equally impressive last names. He clapped his hands. "Today's exercise is improvisation, music with emotion, not just memorization. Let's find out who's been listening and who's been pretending." Savannah immediately raised her hand. "I'd love to go first, but maybe we should let someone else surprise us." She looked back at Kennedy. Mr. Reeves raised an eyebrow, amused. "That's a marvelous suggestion, Savannah." Then, like a snake poised to strike, he turned to the back of the room. "Miss James," he said, "would you care to grace us with your presence at the piano? Or do you prefer listening to Spotify in the back?" The class chuckled. Kennedy froze. Every eye turned to her. The walls felt like they were closing in. "She probably doesn't even know how to read music," someone whispered. Savannah gave a mock encouraging nod. "Go on, Kennedy. Show us what you've got." Kennedy's heart slammed against her ribs. Her palms turned cold. She could have said no, could have shaken her head and waited for the storm to pass. She'd done it before. Blending into the shadows was safer, but not today. Something inside her snapped. She stood up. The room went quiet. She walked past the rows of desks, her footsteps muffled against the carpet. Each step was heavier than the last. Mr. Reeves tilted his head, expecting a clumsy performance to confirm his assumptions. Savannah crossed her arms, already preparing her fake sympathy. Kennedy sat at the piano bench. The wood creaked slightly beneath her. She placed her hands above the keys, hovering just above middle C. Her breath shook. She shut her eyes. And then she played. It started with a single note, then two. Then a cascading run that slid into a melody both haunting and furious, like a storm waiting to break. The same class that mocked her sat stunned. Savannah blinked, her mouth parted, unsure whether to laugh or frown. Mr. Reeves remained still, his fingers twitching against his arm. This wasn't just decent. It was extraordinary. Kennedy was no longer aware of them. Her world narrowed to 88 keys, to the way the chords climbed and collapsed, to how the story unfolded beneath her fingertips. Her shoulders relaxed, her spine straightened. The music came from a place deeper than memory. Deeper than pain. It came from years of playing in the dark while her mom slept in the next room. From Sunday afternoons in an empty church with no audience. From every moment she believed she wasn't enough. And now the room was hers. When the final note drifted into silence, Kennedy held it, allowing the stillness to speak louder than the music. No one clapped, not yet. No one moved. She slowly stood and turned back toward the class. Savannah dropped her gaze first. Mr. Reeves's lips parted, then closed. Finally, he cleared his throat. Unexpected, he muttered. Then he turned his back and scribbled something on the attendance sheet. Kennedy didn't wait for more. She walked back to her seat, her face calm, but her chest heaving. As she sat down, a single sound echoed across the room. Clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire class was applauding, some awkwardly, some in awe, but none of them pretending anymore. Kennedy didn't smile. She didn't have to. She had already said everything she needed to, with music. And the look on Mr. Reeves's face said it all. He'd made a mistake. A mistake he'd never forget. Kennedy's performance wasn't just a shock to the classroom. It was a crack in the walls that had kept her boxed in. But cracks, when they appear in places built on ego, don't go unnoticed for long. By the next morning, whispers had spread like wildfire through Maple Creek's halls, and the people most wounded by it weren't the ones who had listened. It was the ones who'd laughed. Savannah Roth sat at her usual place in the cafeteria, but the air around her had shifted. The same classmates who once orbited her like planets around the sun now approached her with a different energy, one of careful curiosity. That girl, Kennedy, a junior from the vocal department said quietly at the lunch table. She's legit. Savannah's spoon paused in her soup, the clang of metal on porcelain a little too sharp. Please, she said, rolling her eyes. She got lucky. One decent performance doesn't make her a prodigy. But the way she played, another voice added softer. I've never heard Claire de Lune like that. It felt personal. Savannah forced a smile. It's called theatrics. She knew exactly what she was doing. But inside, her chest burned. That night at home, Kennedy barely touched her dinner. April James watched her daughter push a fork through lukewarm pasta and frowned. You still thinking about what happened? She asked gently. Kennedy nodded. It's not what happened that's bothering me. It's what might happen next. You mean the scholarship? April asked. Kennedy hesitated. No, I mean them. Mr. Reeves, Savannah. I humiliated them. April raised an eyebrow. Sweetheart, you didn't humiliate anyone. You just played. Exactly, Kennedy said quietly. And that was enough. The next day brought proof. During fourth period, Kennedy was called to the guidance office. When she arrived, the door was already open, and inside stood Mrs. DeWitt, the guidance counselor, and, unexpectedly, Mr. Reeves. "Miss James, Mrs. DeWitt said, smiling with an odd tightness. "We've heard quite a lot about your performance yesterday." Kennedy nodded cautiously. "Yes, ma'am." Mr. Reeves remained quiet, standing beside the window, his hands behind his back. "Mrs. Collins was very impressed," Mrs. DeWitt continued. "She's nominated you for a regional audition program that could lead to conservatory placement." Kennedy blinked. "What? Conservatory?" "She believes you're talented enough to qualify," Mrs. DeWitt said. "But the selection committee requires more than just a good classroom performance. They'll need to see consistency, range, and humility." That last word hung in the air like a hidden blade. "I understand," Kennedy said softly. Mr. Reeves finally turned, his voice calm but unmistakably condescending. "You surprised us, Kennedy, but a single moment doesn't define artistry. Be careful not to let attention cloud your focus." Kennedy met his eyes. "I wasn't performing for attention, sir." His lips tightened. "Of course not." Back in the classroom, Savannah watched her return with narrowed eyes. As Kennedy sat down, she heard the snicker. "Word is, she thinks she's a star now," Savannah muttered to her friends. "Let's see how long that lasts." But her plan was already forming. 2 days later, the rumor broke. Kennedy cheated. Someone claimed she had learned Clair de Lune from a YouTube tutorial and mimicked the entire piece, that she couldn't actually read music. That her performance was staged for sympathy. It spread fast, text threads, whispers in the lockers, even a vague post on a student-run gossip page. Kennedy felt it immediately. The stares were different now, not impressed, not mocking. Suspicious. She approached Mr. Reeves after class. "Sir, I heard there's a rumor." "I have no comment," he said coldly. "But I suggest you prepare thoroughly for Friday's class assessment. It'll be sight reading." He looked at her the same way he had before the performance. Like she was already a disappointment. Kennedy's jaw tightened. "Understood." That night, her fingers trembled over the keyboard at the church. The melody she tried to practice crumbled under doubt. Was this how it would always be? 1 step forward, 3 slammed doors. But then she remembered something her mom once said after working a 16-hour shift. "You don't play piano to prove anything to them, Kennedy. You play because it's who you are. The rest is just noise." Kennedy took a deep breath. She opened her binder, flipped to the sight reading section, and began to play. Slowly. Carefully. Note by note. Until the sound started to feel like hers again. The battle wasn't over, but Kennedy James had no intention of backing down. The morning of the sight reading test felt colder than usual, even though the sun was shining through the windows of room 202. Kennedy sat at her desk with her hands folded, her sheet music unopened before her. The whispers hadn't stopped, and the energy in the room was heavy with quiet judgment. Savannah sat nearby, her legs elegantly crossed, tapping a designer pen against her notebook with a smirk that hadn't moved since Kennedy walked in. The rumor she'd started had done its job. Doubt was now the dominant narrative surrounding Kennedy's talent. Mr. Reeves entered the room, his tone neutral as always, but the tension in his eyes betrayed more than he let on. "Class," he began, "today we'll conduct a sight reading assessment. You'll each come up one by one, receive a new piece of sheet music, and play it after 1 minute of review. I want to see your technique and how you interpret music you've never seen before." His gaze lingered on Kennedy for a second too long. One by one, students went up to the piano. Some fumbled, some soared. When Savannah's name was called, she glided to the piano with calculated grace. She scanned her sheet confidently, then began to play. The notes poured out, precise and technically flawless, her posture picture perfect. When she finished, Mr. Reeves nodded with an expression of quiet approval. "Well done, Savannah," he said. Then came the name the entire room had been waiting for. "Miss Kennedy James." A few students exchanged glances. One even chuckled softly. Kennedy stood slowly and made her way to the front of the class. Her palms were sweating. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Mr. Reeves handed her the sheet music with an unreadable look. "1 minute," he said simply. Kennedy sat down on the bench. Her eyes moved across the staff, her mind parsing each note, each measure. Her nerves were fraying at the edges. She didn't have years of private lessons. She didn't even own a real piano. She had only ever learned by ear. Her thoughts spiraled. What if the rumor was right in their eyes? What if she gave them a reason to believe it? "Begin," Mr. Reeves said. Kennedy's hands hovered over the keys. Then she closed her eyes for a moment, breathed deeply, and began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, her fingers stumbling through unfamiliar transitions. But then something shifted. She stopped reading and started feeling. The piece was a slow, melancholic melody. As she played, the mistakes grew fewer. Her fingers relaxed. The music took hold of her like it always had, and by the third measure, her eyes weren't even on the paper anymore. She was in it. When the final chord rang out, the classroom was frozen in silence. Not because the performance was perfect. It hadn't been. But because it had become something else, something raw, something real. Mr. Reeves stared at her, conflicted. He couldn't deny that she hadn't read the sheet in the traditional sense. Her interpretation wasn't clean or conventional, but it was exceptional. "Thank you, Kennedy," he said, tone tight. "You may sit." Kennedy returned to her desk, face unreadable, but her heart was racing, not with anxiety, but adrenaline. The bell rang, and as students filed out, Savannah brushed past Kennedy and whispered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." Kennedy turned. "Is that a threat?" Savannah smiled. "Just a reality check. Talent without training doesn't last forever." Kennedy stared at her. "We'll see." Later that afternoon, while Kennedy was cleaning the church sanctuary where she often practiced, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Unknown. You're better than they want you to believe. Stay ready. Big things are coming." She frowned, staring at the screen. Who sent that? And more importantly, how did they know? Something was shifting. And for the first time, Kennedy sensed that this wasn't just about a girl and a piano anymore. Someone else was watching. But 2 days later, Kennedy sat in the church again, pressing down soft notes under dim light, trying to make sense of the cryptic message she'd received. Stay ready. Big things are coming. It lingered in her thoughts, unsettling her more than she cared to admit. Who would send that? And why now? That evening, the door creaked open behind her. You always play like that when you're thinking too hard? Startled, Kennedy spun around. Standing in the doorway was a boy about her age, tall, lanky, with dark skin and a camera hanging from his neck. He held his hands up quickly. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you," he said. "I'm Elijah Cooper. I go to Roosevelt Prep across town. I've seen your performance, the one from Maple Creek." Her eyes narrowed. "How?" "There's a video. Someone recorded it on their phone. It's been spreading. Not viral, but enough. Kennedy's stomach turned. Great, she muttered. I'm not here to bother you, Elijah said, walking further in. I'm actually trying to put together a student docuseries about overlooked talent. You're kind of the definition of that. I didn't ask for attention, she said. I just played. I know. That's why it hit different. Kennedy leaned back on the bench. Is that supposed to be comforting? Elijah shrugged. Only if you're willing to see it as more than just a compliment. He looked around, scanning the space. You always practice here? It's the only piano I have access to. He nodded thoughtfully. Look, I've seen enough to know this isn't just about music. There's something going on at that school. You have no idea, Kennedy muttered. Elijah hesitated, then pulled out his phone. Do you know a girl named Savannah Roth? Kennedy's shoulders stiffened. Unfortunately. Elijah swiped through his phone and showed her a screenshot of a private group chat. One of the messages read, Let's see how long Miss Prodigy lasts when people find out where she practices. Maybe I should leave a surprise in the church next time. Kennedy's face went pale. How did you get this? She asked, voice low. A junior at Maple Creek reached out anonymously, said she couldn't stomach what was happening anymore. Savannah's planning to sabotage the church? Kennedy's voice rose. I don't know if it's just her, Elijah said, but it's not just rumors anymore. Kennedy's heart pounded. This wasn't just bullying. It was personal now. I need to show this to someone, she said. Be careful, Elijah warned. You know how these systems work. Teachers like Reeves, they won't protect you if it means exposing themselves. I'm not going to stay quiet. The next morning, Kennedy printed the screenshots and brought them straight to the assistant principal, Missu Davenport, a sharp, composed woman known for keeping things off the books when they got messy. Ms. Davenport read the messages carefully, then folded the papers and slid them into a drawer. We'll look into this, she said. Kennedy waited. That's it? We can't make assumptions without more context. And technically, these weren't sent on school property. Kennedy's jaw clenched. So, unless I get physically hurt, no one's going to act? Ms. Davenport folded her hands. What I suggest is focusing on your music. Let us handle the rest. Kennedy stared at her for a beat. Then she stood. That's exactly the problem. You've been handling it for years, and this is where we are. She walked out furious. Later that day, as she opened her locker, a crumpled piece of paper fluttered out. It was a photocopy of a failing grade. Her name had been crudely pasted over it, and in red marker it read, Prodigy, huh? Kennedy tore it up and tossed it into the trash. Her hands were shaking, but her spine stayed straight. She would not give them the satisfaction. That evening she called Elijah. I'm in, she said. If you want to tell this story, let's do it. Really? Yes. But I'm not doing this for attention, she added. I'm doing this to make sure nobody else gets shut down like I almost was. Elijah smiled through the phone. Then let's give them a story they can't silence. And in that moment, Kennedy realized something important. Her music might have opened the door, but her voice would be what broke it down. The hallway felt colder that day, not because the weather had shifted, but because Kennedy could feel it. Something was about to break. She kept her head down as she moved through the building. Students glanced at her, some with curiosity, others with disdain. Word of her performance was still quietly spreading, but what they didn't see was what had happened behind the scenes since then. Mrs. Reeves had stopped speaking to her entirely. No more biting comments, no more passive-aggressive critiques. Just silence. but that silence held venom. Kennedy wasn't sure if it was fear or strategy, but she knew better than to mistake it for surrender. Then there was Savannah. Savannah Roth had been quiet, too. Too quiet. Kennedy hadn't seen her since the failed prank at the church, a plan that had fallen apart after Elijah posted the leaked chat messages in a private forum for students and parents. He'd done it anonymously, but the impact was immediate. Discussions were circulating. Whispers among faculty. A quiet tension gripping the school like a fog, but no official statement had been made. And Kennedy knew what that meant. They were protecting someone. That afternoon, while Kennedy sat alone in the library trying to work through a piece of sheet music, Elijah slid into the seat across from her. "I've got something," he whispered. Kennedy looked up, cautious. "What is it?" Elijah pulled out his phone and pressed play. The audio crackled to life. "And if this Carter girl thinks one performance makes her special, she's delusional. Let her play her little heart out. Won't matter when Reeves tanks her grade. She'll be out before the semester ends." Kennedy's stomach dropped. Savannah's voice was unmistakable. Cold, confident. "Where did you get this?" "Same source." "That junior from the group chat. She planted a recorder in the senior lounge." Kennedy blinked. "That's gutsy." She said she was tired of pretending everything was fine. Said she used to look up to Savannah. Not anymore. Kennedy leaned back, processing. "This isn't just bullying. This is coordinated." "Exactly. And they're not just coming after you socially. They're trying to sabotage your future." Kennedy's eyes sharpened. "We're taking this to the board." Elijah hesitated. "That's risky. They might bury it." "Let them try," Kennedy said firmly. "I won't be another girl they silence." The next morning, she and Elijah requested a meeting with the school board's ethics committee. They didn't show up empty-handed. Kennedy had a USB filled with files, the group chat screenshots, the audio recording, and even statements from 2 students who'd anonymously come forward with stories of similar manipulation by Mrs. Reeves in past years. But when they walked into the meeting room, they were met with a wall of polite smiles and icy disinterest. Mr. Langston, the board chair, sat at the center of the panel. His salt and pepper hair and custom suit made him look more like a senator than a school administrator. "You've brought some serious accusations," he said, fingers laced together. "They're not accusations," Kennedy replied, her voice clear. "They're evidence. We'll review them carefully," he said. Kennedy narrowed her eyes. "How carefully?" Mr. Langston gave a tight smile. "That depends on how willing the accused are to respond. Due process is key." "Even if they have no intention of telling the truth?" He didn't answer. "Just moved on." Kennedy clenched her fists under the table. She had walked in hoping for justice. But she was sitting in front of a board more interested in appearances than accountability. After the meeting, she stood outside with Elijah, staring at the front steps. "They're not going to act," she said flatly. "No," he agreed. "Not unless we make it impossible for them not to." She looked at him, a new determination building behind her eyes. "How far are you willing to go?" she asked. Elijah smiled. "I already started editing the footage." "You're really going to release it?" "With or without permission," he said. "But I'd rather have your voice in it." Kennedy didn't answer right away. Her heart was pounding with rage and something else, resolve. She wasn't going to play nice anymore. If the system didn't care about the truth, then she would make them listen the only way they knew how. She turned to Elijah. "Then let's give them a concert they'll never forget." The video dropped at exactly 7:00 p.m. It wasn't flashy. No dramatic intro, no slow zooms or heavy music. Just raw, quiet truth. Kennedy's voice opened the video, her face dimly lit by the old piano she always practiced on. She didn't cry, didn't plead, she just told the story. This isn't about a bad grade. Or a mean girl. This is about a system built to keep people like me small. The screen cut to the audio recording of Savannah Roth laughing about tanking her chances. Then the group chat screenshots. Then quiet testimonials from other students, voices blurred, faces hidden. And then the performance. Elijah had secretly recorded her playing Claire de Lune in class. Not from the front, but from a seat near the back, showing every face in that room as the music took over. Every sneer that softened, every whisper that died. Even Mr. Reeves's lips parting slightly in disbelief. The final note lingered into silence. And then Kennedy spoke again. I didn't grow up with a grand piano in my living room. I didn't have private tutors. All I had were old sheet music from the library and a keyboard with one broken key. But I played anyway, because I had to. Because music was the only thing that made me feel like I mattered, and that should be enough. By 8:00 p.m., the video had already passed 100,000 views. By 10:00 p.m., the school's official email inbox had crashed. By midnight, Justice for Kennedy was trending. The next morning, Kennedy walked into school with her hood up. Not to hide, but to keep focus. Her heart raced as students turned to watch her. Some gave small nods, some whispered. But no one laughed, not anymore. The principal, Mr. Crawford, met her at the front office. Come with me, he said, curt and professional. She followed him to a conference room. Inside were two people she didn't recognize, district representatives, both of them grim-faced and carrying thick folders. We're conducting an investigation, one of them said, starting immediately. Kennedy nodded. Am I being punished? Quite the opposite, the woman said. You're being heard. For the first time since the video went live, Kennedy felt herself exhale. Still, she wasn't naive. They weren't doing this because it was right. They were doing it because it was public. As the meeting ended, she stepped out and saw Savannah standing at the end of the hallway, pale and rattled. You think this changes anything? Savannah hissed. You embarrassed yourself more than you embarrassed me. Kennedy didn't flinch. Then why are you shaking? Savannah scoffed, but she had nothing left to say. Kennedy walked past her, calm, composed. But inside her, a fire was building, not revenge, not yet. But something colder, sharper. She didn't just want to survive the game anymore. She wanted to change the rules. The day Kennedy Washington stood before the school board, the sky over Atlanta was steel gray and heavy. It hadn't started raining yet, but the air carried the kind of pressure that made people tense their shoulders without realizing. It matched the feeling in Kennedy's chest perfectly. The boardroom was larger than she expected. The long oak table gleamed beneath a row of recessed lights, and the chairs were filled with people in suits and controlled expressions. Superintendent March sat at the head, flanked by Mr. Langston and 3 other district administrators, Mrs. Reeves, still composed but visibly strained, sat near the back. And right beside her, trying to appear unbothered, was Savannah Roth. Kennedy stood alone. No lawyer, no parent, just her and her truth. Ms. Washington, Superintendent March began, tapping a pen on the table. We've reviewed your video, your submitted evidence, and the numerous student statements that followed. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before deliberations begin? Kennedy looked around the room. The air felt tight, still. She stepped forward and spoke slowly. You've seen what I've been through. But this isn't just about me. It's about how easily systems like yours look the other way when power and privilege are challenged. You allowed a teacher to humiliate me in front of my peers. You allowed students to target me because I didn't come from money. And now that the public's watching, you suddenly care. But my dignity shouldn't depend on a trending hashtag. Savannah let out a quiet scoff. Kennedy turned sharply toward her. You think I did all this for attention? She said. You still don't get it. You thought mocking me would break me. You thought your name would protect you, but I don't need to come from a legacy family to demand respect. Superintendent March raised a hand. Let's stay focused on the issue. This is the issue, Kennedy cut in. You want this to be a clean little scandal you can sweep away with a few suspensions, but I'm not letting you bury it. A heavy pause fell over the room. Mr. Langston shifted in his seat. We're not here to debate your feelings, Ms. Washington, he said. Then maybe you shouldn't have spent years ignoring the feelings of every student like me, she fired back, because I'm not the first, and if nothing changes, I won't be the last. Mrs. Reeves stiffened. Her lips parted slightly, but her words caught. She looked like a statue beginning to crack. Ms. Reeves, March said, turning toward her, do you have a response to the claim that you deliberately sabotaged Kennedy's academic standing and targeted her for public humiliation? There was a long beat. The room waited. I simply encouraged participation, she said coldly. Any emotional reaction to that is subjective. Kennedy clenched her jaw, but then a voice piped up from the corner. I have a statement, said a girl Kennedy recognized. Elena Tran, a quiet senior who had rarely spoken in class. All eyes turned. Elena stood. 2 years ago, I missed out on an audition for the state music competition because Mrs. Reeves claimed I hadn't submitted the right paperwork. She just never forwarded it. When I asked why, she said, maybe next time you'll try harder. Another voice followed. And last year, I got a C- on my final, even though my project had the highest performance score, said Miles, a junior violinist. She said my attitude wasn't collaborative enough. One by one, more students stood. Each shared a story. Small injustices, quiet insults, unexplained academic penalties, all pointing in the same direction. By the time the 7th student spoke, the entire boardroom was frozen. Savannah was pale. Mrs. Reeves looked down at the table, her hands shaking. And Kennedy. She stood taller than she had in her life. Superintendent March cleared his throat. Given the pattern of behavior and the severity of what's been brought forward today, we are recommending Mrs. Reeves be placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Additionally, the board will review grading patterns and disciplinary action related to all affected students. Mrs. Reeves said nothing. Savannah looked like she wanted to run. But Kennedy stayed still. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. Because she knew this wasn't over. But for the first time, the people in power were finally afraid of being exposed. And that was only the beginning. A week later, Kennedy stood at the back of the school auditorium, waiting for her name to be called. She didn't recognize the version of herself in the mirror that morning. Shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, and something in her walk that had weight. Not arrogance, just certainty. The kind you only earn after standing in the storm and choosing not to run. The district had issued an official apology. Mrs. Reeves had been placed on indefinite leave, pending disciplinary review. And Savannah? She wasn't expelled, but her reputation had cracked beyond repair. The whispers that used to follow Kennedy now trailed Savannah down the halls. Quiet, sharp reminders that power built on cruelty never lasts. Kennedy took her seat near the front, her mother beside her, dressed in her best nurse's scrubs, hair pulled into a neat bun, eyes proud and soft at once. They sat in silence for a moment, just listening to the buzz of students and teachers filling the room. "I still can't believe they asked me to perform," Kennedy said under her breath. Monica smiled. "They didn't ask. They hoped. You just gave them a reason to believe again." Kennedy didn't reply. She just gripped her hands in her lap, her fingers still sore from hours of practice, and looked toward the stage. Principal Crawford stepped to the podium. "Before we begin tonight's performances, we have a special presentation," he said. "One that reflects not just talent, but courage. Tonight, a student will play not because she was chosen by a panel or pre-selected by politics, but because she made herself undeniable." The lights dimmed. Kennedy rose. She walked slowly to the stage, heart pounding, but it was no longer the fear she used to carry. It was something else. Something alive. She took her place at the grand piano, the same brand that once felt too polished for her fingers. She adjusted the bench, rolled her shoulders back, and let her hands rest on the keys. The spotlight wasn't blinding, it was warm. Centering. The applause died down into quiet, and she played. Not the piece she had performed in Mr. Reeves's class, not a pre-approved selection. She played her own composition. Notes written late at night after the board hearing, melodies shaped by the tension in her chest, the exhaustion in her bones, the fire in her voice. It wasn't classical. It wasn't jazz. It wasn't anything you could label. It was hers. The auditorium was still. Even the fidgeting stopped. No one moved. No one whispered. Savannah, seated near the back, didn't speak, didn't scoff. She just stared, arms folded, lips pressed thin. But in her eyes, a flicker of something deeper than shame. Regret. When the final note fell, the silence lingered longer than applause would have. Kennedy closed her eyes, hands still on the keys. She didn't stand for ovation. She didn't need to, because for the first time, she didn't play for approval. She played for herself. The moment passed. Then the room exploded into applause. Some students stood. A few teachers wiped tears. Even Principal Crawford looked moved in a way that was too honest to be rehearsed. Kennedy stood and gave a single bow, then walked off the stage, her mother meeting her halfway with tears brimming. "You've always been music, baby," Monica whispered. "They just finally heard you." That night, Kennedy didn't dream of stages or awards. She dreamed of writing more, of teaching one day, maybe opening a community studio where kids like her could walk in and sit at a real piano without permission or judgment. The system hadn't changed overnight, but it cracked. And through that crack, someone like her finally got through. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was undeniable.